Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Mari Inoue, co-founding member of Mahan Project for a Nuclear-Free World, which is a volunteer-led grassroots group in New York City. We raise awareness of the costs, risks, and humanitarian consequences of nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. This April, the Japanese government announced its decision to dump more than 1.25 million metric tons of radioactive water from the damaged Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean. Right after the announcement, Secretary Blinken of the United States expressed his support to this outrageous plan by tweeting, quote, "We thank Japan for its transparent efforts in its decision," unquote. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, also published a video message of Director General saying that IAEA is ready to support Japan on Fukushima water disposal. On the other hand, the UN human rights experts expressed deep regret at Japan's decision. They expressed their concerns that the dumping of the radioactive water from the Fukushima Daiichi, quote, could impact millions of lives and livelihood in the Pacific region, unquote. And such dumping imposes considerable risks to the full enjoyment of human rights of concerned populations in and beyond the borders of Japan. The Japanese government continues to use phrases such as so-called treated water or filtered water to downplay the situation. But in reality, the radioactive water accumulated in the Fukushima Daiichi site contains an extremely high level of radioactivity. Radioactive isotopes such as tritium and carbon-14 cannot be isolated from the water by the ALPS filtering system. In June 2021, on behalf of 70 US groups, our group has submitted an open letter to the government of Japan calling for the withdrawal of its dumping plan. We also co-organized the Protect Our Ocean March and rally near the United Nations. Today, you will hear about the ongoing nuclear crisis in Fukushima, issues and concerns over Japan's outrageous plan, and underreported hazards of tritium from the experts and activists. A Q&A session follows the presentation. So during the event, please keep yourself muted. And if you have any questions to any of the speakers, please put them in the chat. And we already received many questions by emails, but we will try our best answering to your questions. So first, we'd like to introduce you Ms. Riko Muto. She's a Fukushima-based anti-nuclear activist who began her anti-nuclear activities in the late 1980s. She will talk about ongoing nuclear crisis in Fukushima, why TEPCO, the owner of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, cannot be trusted, and concerns over Japan's plan to dump more than 1.28 million tons of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. The following is the video message from Ms. Riko Muto. Please take a look.
皆さん、こんにちは。私は日本の福島県三春町に住んでいます、武藤瑠衣子と申します。2011年に起きた福島原発事故は、今も原子力緊急事態宣言が解除されず続いています。10年が経ち、今、小児甲状腺がんの増加や原発事故被害の不可視化、被害者の切り捨て、原子力関連産業の大きな巻き返しが起き、私は福島の未来に大きな危惧を抱えています。この事故で16万人以上の人が避難を余儀なくされましたが、家や仕事、健康、地域とのつながりや文化を失うという深刻な被害にもかかわらず、事故の責任が 明確に問われない中、2012年、福島県民1324人とともに、東電や国の責任者を刑事告訴しました。その後、全国1万4000人がこの告訴に続きました。検察の2度の不起訴処分、検察審査会の2度の起訴相当議決を経て、東京電力の旧経営陣を強制起訴に持ち込み、2017年に刑事裁判が開かれました。38回の公判で、東電の津波対策の不作為が多くの証言や証拠によって明らかになりましたが、判決は全員無罪でした。本当にがっかりしましたが、11月からの控訴審に向けて、東電の罪を多くの人に知ってもらおうと活動しています。起きたことを反省し、教訓としなければ、また同じことが繰り返されます。何よりも命と環境が大切にされる世界を作っていくために、諦めずに頑張っていこうと思っています。さて、事故を起こした福島原発は、10年経って初めて原子炉の蓋が高濃度に汚染されていることが分かったり、放射能を除去する装置の排気フィルターに穴が開いていたことが発覚したり、事故の全容も未解明だし、安全管理もずさんなままです。その中で、1日4000人の収束作業員が過酷な被爆労働をしています。今年の4月に日本政府は原発敷地内に約128万トン溜まった汚染水を海洋放出する方針を強引に決めました。福島県の漁連、全国の漁連のほか、福島県の農林水産業、観光業はこの方針に明確に反対をしています。福島県の7割の自治体議会も反対意見を出しています。国内外からの署名や声明、パブリックコメントの意見にも全く耳を貸さない決定でした。この汚染水を日本政府は処理水と呼んでいますが、約860兆ベクレルのトリチウムのほか、ストロンチウム90や炭素14などの放射性物質が国示濃度を超えて残留しています。市民は敷地の拡大や大型タンクやモルタル固化による貯留など陸上保管を提案していますが、一番お金がかからない海洋放出ありきでことが進められています。原発事故の被害は福島、日本だけではなく世界の人々、この地球に生きるあらゆる命にも被害をもたらしました。そして拡散された放射性物質は今を生きる世代だけではなく、次の世代、さらにその次の世代へと長く影響をもたらします。その上、さらに意図的に放射性物質を世界の貴重な共有財産である海に放出することは許されないことだと思います。世界、特に環太平洋の国々に住む皆さんに大きな放射能被害をもたらす可能性があることにとても心が痛みます。私たちは日本の国内で放出を止めるためにできることを頑張ります。ぜひ力を貸してください。共につながり、世界の海の放射能汚染を止めていきましょう。
Thank you very much, Muto-san, for the powerful message. Next, we'd like to introduce you Ms. Kiana Siegel of Reverse the Trans Pacific Youth Committee. She's from the Federated States of Micronesia and is currently studying law at the University of the South Pacific in Vanuatu. Reverse the Trans Pacific Youth Committee has recently issued Youth Declaration on the Crisis of Nuclear Dumping in the Blue Pacific. Please welcome Kiana. Kiana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Marie. And hello, everyone. My name is Kiana. I'm here as a representative of Reverse the Trend Pacific. Our Pacific chapter is just one of the many RTT chapters that span across the globe. So I'm here to speak on what our perspectives and what we've done in relation to Japan's decision. So RTT Pacific actually formed as a result of Japan's unilateral decision to release radioactive wastewater into the Pacific Ocean. On August 26th of this year, we helped organize a conference on what we called the crisis of nuclear dumping in the Blue Pacific, which included youth members, leaders, elders, and activists. There was an open intergenerational dialogue where speakers provided perspectives and suggestions for the different approaches that could be taken to address the dumping of nuclear waste into our Blue Pacific. After this conference, our RTT Pacific Youth Committee drafted a declaration which strongly opposed Japan's decision. In this declaration, we expressed our great disappointment that Japan and other nations who continue to carelessly disregard the imminent threats we continue to face in our Pacific region. Despite the reassurance that the wastewater has been treated and is safe, we in the Pacific are not convinced that it will not have devastating impacts on our marine environment. For Pacific Island communities, our marine environment has been depended upon for food, economic development, transportation, traditional practices, and protection from the impacts of climate change. Our core island communities for food and economic growth. Thus, the damage that may be done by the dumping of nuclear waste into our Pacific Ocean will be catastrophic. The question that continues to be asked is why the Pacific Ocean? If the wastewater is safe, if it will not pose a significant threat to our environment and communities, why can't it be dumped or stored elsewhere? This is why we believe the Japanese government must consult with frontline communities. We are not just a group of remote islands in the middle of the ocean that are too far removed from the actions of industrialized nations. Given the toxic nuclear legacy that has left behind in the Pacific, we believe that now more than ever, our pursuit in addressing nuclear injustice is crucial for the sake of the enjoyment of our basic human rights. We continue to be encouraged by the work that has been done by leaders, activists, and organizations who continue to rally against Japan's decision. We hope that the alternative solutions that have been offered, the scientific studies that have been conducted, and the concerns of frontline communities will be taken into serious consideration. As members of RTT Pacific, we will do our part to keep momentum going, and we hope to have more Pacific youth representation regarding decisions such as this. Kalangan, and thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of Reverse the Trend Pacific and for allowing a Pacific youth member such as myself to speak here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kiana, and thank you very much for the Youth Committee of RTT for your courageous act in raising voices against Japan's outrageous plan. So thank you so much for your ongoing activism and your efforts on this issue. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Ms. June Tano of Mahan Project for a Nuclear-Free World. After June of this year, after we submitted the letter to the Japanese government, we had a in-person meeting with the consul of the Japanese consulate in New York City. And we were able to talk to him, and we asked him what is the plan for the dumping plan, and he continued to say that the contaminated water from the Fukushima site is safe to the ocean. So we decided to organize a rally and march near the United Nations to express our strong opposition against this plan. And Jun-san was the main organizer of the Jun-san was the main organizer of the marching rally on October 2nd. So let's hear from Jun-san how she organized this and the report of the rally. Jun-san. Thank you so much for your work. Can you unmute yourself, Jun-san?
Thank you, Mari, and thank you, everybody. Let me talk about protect our ocean that we had March and rally on October 2nd. We gathered together at the park in the middle of Manhattan, and then we marched to the park in front of the United Nations. We had a rally there. During the march and rally, we handed over the flyers and collected the signature for the letter to President Biden. By doing so, I found out why New Yorkers were silent on this issue. The reason was that they didn't know what was happening in Fukushima. I think that Japan and TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, need to make an honest announcement to the world that they will release radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean so that people around the world can make the right judgment on this issue. At the rally, we had 6 speeches and 4 music performances. The messages from speakers were sincere and powerful and touched participants' hearts. Singers energized participants and made them smile. If you want to watch the videos, please visit our Facebook event pages. The importance of the message, protect our ocean, was deeply engraved in the hearts of the participants. We also collected 70 signed letters to President Biden to ask to instruct his special envoy Kerry for climate to raise the issue of the release of radioactive water from Fukushima Daiichi at the CoP26 conference. We also encouraged people to send emails to the White House about this issue. The release of radioactive water will begin in 2023. We will continue to speak out so that future generations will not have to worry about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jun-san. I apologize for the technical difficulty that we had. I don't think the PowerPoint presentation was properly shared. So let me share from my screen.
Thank you.
So let me see. So Jun-san, can you briefly explain
Yes.
these photos? So this
Yes,
is the beginning of the march.
Yes, right.
And starting
And-
marching.
And we walked on the street 42nd towards 2nd Avenue and went to north to Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza. It is in front of the United Nations. And this is the rally opening. Song from Sally Campbell and the speech Rosemary Pace, Pax Christi, New York State. Susan Schnall, Veterans for Peace, Chapter 34. Raising Grannies. We sang together with Raising Grannies. There are many participants. Tony Sahara, Manhattan Project for a Nuclear-Free World. He talked about a lady who just passed away. She is a main organizer of the Japanese groups. And
her name was,
Sophia,
oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Her name is Yayoi Hitomi. She lived in Fukushima, but she was suffering from the ovarian cancer. And in September, she passed away. But she was very active in anti-nuclear activism in Fukushima. And she sent us a video message a couple of years ago, which is available in our YouTube channel. So if you have a chance, please take a look at her video message.
and Sophia Kadeli reversed the trend. She spoke regarding the use of the Pacific Islanders and the filthy rotten system band and a message from Korea and two green clothing men, so-called green men. Charlene Leahy and Sally Jones, Peace Action New York State. And we had the photo together.
Thank you very much, Jun-san.
Thank you.
Right, so next, we would like to hear from Mr. Yasunori Fujimoto. Let me put him in the spotlight.
Greetings to many of our.
Let me
Oh, yeah.
introduce Mr. Fujimoto-san. I apologize. So Mr. Yasunori Fujimoto is a co-chair of Gensuikin, Japan Congress Against A and H bombs, one of the largest and oldest anti-nuclear groups in Japan. Gensuikin has been holding numerous negotiation sessions with representatives of Japanese government agencies on this issue and actively opposes the dumping plan. Fujimoto-san, thank you so much for joining us.
よろ
Please
しい
go
ですか
ahead. はい、よろしくお願いします。
Greetings to many of our colleagues who are greatly concerned about the global environment. I am Yasunari Fujimoto, co-chair of Gensuikin, the Japanese Congress Against A and H bombs. The CoP26 has started. Even in Japan, where I live, global warming and the resulting climate change are the most important issues. Because heavy rain hits every year and damage such as river flood and mudslides continue. We witness their drought, heavy rains, and other forms of extreme weather threatening our society. There is no doubt that the world needs to work toward carbon neutrality. The Japanese government has started to work toward reducing carbon emissions. However, as an alternative fossil fuels such as coal, they are returning to a policy that depend of nuclear power. As many of you are aware, in the Great East Japan earthquake on March 11, 2011, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant lost all power, and the nuclear fuel that had been loaded melted down. The damaged nuclear power plant caused hydrogen explosion and radioactive materials fell not only in Fukushima Prefecture, but also in various parts of Eastern Japan. Even after 10 years, there are still areas contaminated with radioactivity that people cannot return to. Gensuikin oppose nuclear power plants because they cause extremely serious environmental contamination once an accident occurs. Therefore, we have been campaigning to eliminate nuclear power since the 1970s. We must recognize that the deterioration of the global environment is not limited to global warming. The damaged reactors in Fukushima release extremely high radiation dose, and it is impossible to comprehend the station inside the reactors. Cooling by water is continued to avoid criticality. The cooling water is contaminated with large amount of radioactive materials, and it is difficult to remove all of the radioactive materials even with the advanced liquid processing systems, especially tritium, which cannot be removed at all. Even now, total of more than 1.28 million metric tons of contaminated water is stored in more than 1,000 tanks. Each tank can hold up to 1,000 metric tons of contaminated water, and 110 metric tons are added every day. The Japanese government has decided to dilute and release this contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean, and is currently rushing in preparation to do so. Contaminated the Pacific Ocean with radioactivity is an outrageous act that should not be condoned. There is no evidence to suggest that radioactive materials such as tritium are safe. We do not know what kind of environmental contamination will occur if it continue to be released for a long time. Gensuikin strongly oppose this outrageous act. I appeal to everyone in the states bordering the Pacific Ocean, please raise your voice against this plan. We would like to do our best to save the planet for the sake of our children of the future. I would like to leave you with the words of our seniors from the Genseeking. Nuclear and humanity cannot coexist. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fujimoto, and thank you very much for your powerful words. Nuclear and humanity cannot coexist. It's very powerful. Thank you. Next speaker is Dr. Caitlin Stronell of Citizens Nuclear Information Center. Let's put her in the spotlight. Wonderful. So Dr. Caitlin Stronell completed her PhD in political studies from a university in India in 2016. Her research focused on the Indian anti-nuclear movement. She works as a researcher with the Citizens Nuclear Information Center, which is a nonprofit organization based in Tokyo, Japan. And she's also an editor of Nuke Info Tokyo, which is CNIC's English web magazine, which is a free magazine that you can subscribe to, that aims to provide English-speaking friends with up-to-date information on the Japanese nuclear industry and the movements against it. So please welcome Dr. Stronell.
Thank you so much, Mari. It's really good to be here with everyone. Hi. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Let's see if this works. Okay, is that visible?
Yes.
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, so I thought I'd start with some just giving a brief outline what I'll be discussing today, and also some context. So as Fujimoto-san just pointed out, CoP26 has begun, and the global nuclear lobby will be very active in trying to convince the world that nuclear power is the way out of the climate crisis. And of course, there are many reasons why we shouldn't believe them. And the plan, what we're discussing today, this plan to dump the radioactive contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean is one of those reasons. It's one example of the irresponsibility and the disregard for health and environment that we so often see in the nuclear industry. So with that context, I will be covering 3 points today. The current status of the contaminated water at the Fukushima Daiichi plant, which even 10 years later is still very much an ongoing problem. One of the problems is issues with the filtering system that is being used to filter this water. It's called the ELP system, so I'll be discussing that. And then I'll also be talking about some updates on the current plan to dump this water, and also I'll be talking about alternatives and some more of the protest, which we've seen a lot of already, but some more of the protest details. Okay, so what is in these tanks? What do they actually contain? Basically, this water, the 1.28 million tons of this contaminated water, it's water that has been used to cool the melted down fuel. And if it's not constantly cooled, even over 10 years later, it could again become critical and a nuclear reaction could happen. So it has to be constantly cooled. Also groundwater flows into the site. TEPCO's tried to stop with this with various methods. They have an ice wall and other things, but this has not been 100% effective. So there's still groundwater, and also rainwater, which comes through the roof. I think I missed a slide, so I'm going to go back. Sorry. This is an aerial view of the Fukushima area, and you can see the reason I remembered was because this is the reactor buildings, unit 1 to 4, and it's probably hard to see on the screen, but as they suffered hydrogen explosions, there's not very much of them left. So the roof is not very intact, which is why rainwater gets through it. But you can see, so this is the area of the 4 of the 6 reactors at the plant, but this is the area where all the tanks are. So obviously it is a very large area which contains all that water. So getting back to the details of what's in the tanks. Yeah, so this is why there's so much water. And the thing is that it still increases daily by 140 tons. So it's not like all the water that's there, if they just keep that, it'll be fine. It keeps increasing. So this is why nuclear accidents are an ongoing problem, that they don't just end immediately. The amount of tritium which is contained in these tanks, in terms of its radioactivity, there's 860 trillion becquerels of tritium. Now, the point with tritium, as has been mentioned, is that it can't be filtered out. So what TEPCO has said they will do, so at the moment, this 860 trillion becquerels is the equivalent of 730,000 becquerels per litre. And TEPCO has said that they will dilute this to 1,500 becquerels per litre before it's dumped into the ocean. But we have to remember that any dilution, it's not actually changing the quantity of the radionuclides. It doesn't actually wash them away. They are there for as long as their half-life dictates. So even though this is going to be diluted, this 860 trillion becquerels of tritium is going to end up in the ocean over a long period of time. But even if it's diluted, that really doesn't solve the problem. The water also contains another 62 radionuclides, including all of cesium-134 and 137, and 62 other ones other than tritium. The thing is that these 62 radionuclides are supposed to be filtered out by ALPS, the Advanced Liquid Processing System, which TEPCO decided to install in 2012. Now, this system is supposed to filter out most of these other 62 radioactive substances, but it can't filter out tritium. But the point is that actually in 71%, this is a graph provided by TEPCO, and even though all of the water in the tanks has been through the ALPS filtration, only 29% of it actually is of a standard, meets the regulatory standards. 71% of it, the ALPS system didn't even filter out the other 62 nuclides. It can't filter out tritium, but it didn't even filter out the others. So this 71% of the water in the tanks has to be repurified. And this hopefully will remove the other radionuclides to a regulatory standard, but it's not zero. So apart from the 860 trillion becquerels of tritium, there will also be more radioactive particles which will also be released. So we have to also keep that in mind. The latest plan, which was announced in August this year, was that a 1 kilometre undersea tunnel will be constructed, and the water will be, the contaminated water will be released through that tunnel. Now, TEPCO claims that this 1 kilometer tunnel will make the water be released in an area where there are no fishing rights. And as the fishing unions, as has already been mentioned by Muto-san, the fishing unions have been vehemently against this plan right from the beginning. And I have to say that this announcement of the 1 kilometer undersea tunnel hasn't changed that at all. Even if it goes to an area where there's no fishing rights, it will of course travel. It's not going to stay there. The water will permeate throughout the whole ocean. So the fishermen aren't placated as maybe TEPCO thought they would be. The other claim is that it's easier to dilute the water if it's further out to sea. This is certainly true. If it's released on the coast, then it's brought back by waves. And there's also a danger that the water they use to dilute will also be contaminated. So the idea that taking it further out to sea will certainly help with the dilution. But as I mentioned, diluting the water doesn't actually get rid of the radioactivity. The other perhaps surreptitious kind of underground reason for building the tunnel is that it will be much harder for media and citizens to monitor and to actually see. It'll be harder it won't make a news story. It'll be much easier for TEPCO to keep this whole thing out of the public eye. So I'm sure that's also one of their reasons. I have to say that there are many protests, as we've seen internationally and also within Japan. And there's many alternatives which have been proposed to this plan. The Citizens Commission on Nuclear Energy, CCNE, has made concrete proposals for alternatives to dumping this water a long time ago. Like, it's not a plan that's just come up recently. They have proposed this for a while. And the first point is that we can keep storing this water in it needs to be in more robust and more appropriate containers. But now that it is stored, keeping it stored is certainly a viable option. Another proposal is to solidify it with cement and then bury it. This technology already exists and it's in practice in the US. So it's something that can be implemented immediately. It's not something that has to be developed. What could be developed and what's being worked on already is technology for separating tritium. Maybe in the future, it may be possible to do this, and then that technology could be used to actually remove the tritium. So there are concrete alternatives to this proposal. They just have been ignored by TEPCO. As I think Mari mentioned, Gensuikin and CNIC, along with 6 other NPOs, have had negotiations 4 times since last year with various government ministries on this issue, and many issues were discussed. Some of our main points were that releasing this water will be a violation of the London Protocol, which is a treaty that protects the marine environment from waste dumping. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in typical bureaucratic fashion, came up with all sorts of technical arguments saying that it wasn't a violation because it would be out to sea, it's not on the coast, and various other technical loopholes. We also claimed that this is a violation of the promise made by the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, METI, which is the ministry that's in charge of the nuclear industry. In 2015, that the water would not be released without the agreement of all affected parties. And they made this promise, but now, as we've already seen, there is so many affected parties that are completely opposed to this plan, yet the government has forced it through and announced that this is what they'll be doing. METI's answer to this in the negotiations was, oh, we've still got 2 years, so we'll be able to convince everyone in the next 2 years. Doesn't seem likely, but yeah, that's their excuse. I'd like to end with this. Oh yeah, I keep skipping slides, sorry. So why is the government so intent on dumping this water despite all of these protests? The government and TEPCO reasons, firstly, they say there's not enough space on the site. But this is largely because they have plans to recover the melted down fuel, which is still somewhere in the reactors. And in fact, whether they can do this or not is anybody's guess. They have robots and things, because it's still obviously much too radioactive for any human being to go anywhere near. So they've sent robots in to take photos and try and figure out where this melted down fuel is and what it looks like, what sort of state it's in. Even the robots die. So it doesn't seem likely that this is really going to happen in the near future. And even if they did manage to recover this fuel, what would they do with it? Like it's really the whole roadmap of the decommissioning of Fukushima Daiichi really needs to be discussed more openly. And there needs to be much more realistic kind of proposals. And if the idea is to just dump all the water because they need to make space for this hypothetical melted down fuel, it's not a good enough reason. The claim also on the part of TEPCO and the government is that it's the most practical solution. Practical for who? Basically, it's the cheapest solution for TEPCO, but they're the perpetrators. They're the reason why this happened in the first place. They're the cause of the accident. So surely the people who have been affected by the accident should have a say in what the best solution is. But they've basically been ignored, and the people who caused the accident, they've got the solution that's best for them, which hardly seems fair at all. And again, this argument that the water will be diluted so it's safe. I'm sure Dr. Fairley will tell us more about the safety of tritium, but really there's a safety myth which the global nuclear industry, it's in their vital interest that this myth is kept alive, because nuclear power plants all around the world, and especially reprocessing facilities, release huge amounts of tritium just routinely. And so if TEPCO was to admit that this tritium is unsafe, it would send ripples really around the whole global industry. So upholding this safety myth is also another thing that we need to take into consideration. And this map is a world map that was also released by TEPCO as part of their documents. And it shows, it's probably pretty hard to see on the screen, but it shows the amount of tritium that is released annually by various nuclear facilities around the world. And we see here the UK Sellafield reprocessing facility releases about 423 terabecquerels every year. And compared to that, Fukushima Daiichi will only release 2.2 terabecquerels. So the argument by TEPCO is that, see, it's hardly anything at all. And all of these places all around the world are all releasing this tritium and it's all fine. So this is their argument. But really, I think the message from COP26 is that releasing all this CO2 and everyone saying it's okay to release this and releasing it all over these years has got us into this mess. And we really, this idea that we can just pump all this poison into the environment and leave it for future generations to deal with, this age is over. And we really need to think of better alternatives. Okay, so thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Stronel. Next speaker is Dr. Ian Fairley. He will talk about the underreported hazards of tritium and concerns over proposed tritium discharges from Fukushima. He's a vice president of Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, CND, in London, and an independent consultant on radioactivity in the environment. He has studied radiation and radioactivity at least since Chernobyl accident. Let me put him in spotlight. Wonderful. Thank you. Let me finish. Okay, so he has studied radiation and radioactivity at least since the Chernobyl accident in 1986. He has a degree in radiation biology from college and also doctoral studies at Imperial College in London and briefly Princeton University in the US, concerned the radiological hazards of nuclear fuel reprocessing. He formerly worked as a civil servant on the regulation of radiation risks from nuclear power stations. From 2000 to 2004, he was head of the Secretariat of the UK government's CERRIE Committee on Internal Radiation Risks. Since retiring from the government service, he has been a consultant on radiation matters to the European Parliament, local and regional governments, environmental NGOs, and private individuals. His areas of interest are radiation doses and risks arising from the radioactive releases at nuclear facilities. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Ian Fowley.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much to Marie and her colleagues for organizing this seminar. I very much support the comments by Dr. Stranell about the need for the nuclear industry to promote tritium as being safe right around the world. That's paramount, and it's probably the main reasons why at Japan they're proposing to dump radioactive water into the sea. In other words, they have to keep up with the pretense that tritium is safe. I'm going to talk today very briefly about tritium and its dangers. Radiation and radioactivity is a very difficult matter to get across. I've spent 30 years of my life studying it, but at the very least, this will be an introduction to the dangers of tritium. And I'm also going to be showing you the link to my further work on tritium, which people can peruse at their leisure. Right. The first thing I want to get across is that there are broadly speaking, two kinds of radiation. Firstly, external radiation, the kind of radiation you get if you, say, break your arm and you go to the hospital and get an X-ray. But more serious is the radiation that you get from radionuclides inside your body. That is much more serious because it radiates you 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And tritium is primarily and totally an internal radionuclide. So we really have to concern ourselves with internal radiation. Now, tritium is what we call a radioactive isotope. By that I mean, if you take a radioactive atom, it's unstable, it will disintegrate or decay with a given half-life, and when it decays, it releases energy and also oftentimes a particle. The two of them combined is called radiation. So that's what happens when we are irradiated from inside. These radioactive atoms stay in our body and emit radiation and particles inside us. So what is tritium? Well, tritium is the radioactive isotope of hydrogen, which is the smallest element. It has quite a long half-life, 12.3 years, and it decays by emitting a beta particle inside you. Here is a tritium atom. It has a proton and 2 neutrons, and it's a single electron going around about it. Why is tritium important? Well, it's for about many reasons. For a start, it's a vital component in nuclear weapons. When we talk about hydrogen bombs, that's the hydrogen. It should really be called tritium bombs. Tritium is produced in all nuclear reactors and in reprocessing plants. It's produced in all disused reactors around the world. And it's also, it would be produced in fusion reactors if they ever got going. I doubt very much that would occur. What is the most common way of us seeing tritium is with radioactive water, tritiated water. We all know that water is H2O, like this. And one of these 2 hydrogen atoms is radioactive. So the water becomes radioactive. It's not something in the water, but it's the water itself. Here's a schematic diagram of water, 2 H's, and an oxygen atom at a 180-degree angle here. Now, one of these hydrogen atoms becomes radioactive. That's what tritiated water means. Now, one of the main phenomena of tritium is that it swaps with its radioactive atoms with atoms nearby. For example, this is a diagram of a number of water atoms, water molecules, I beg your pardon. H is here, oxygen's here. And what happens is that, this has to do with quantum mechanics, is that these hydrogen atoms swap with adjacent water molecules like this. These 2 atoms will swap very quickly, and it takes about 10 to the minus 15 seconds. So that no matter where you've got tritium, you'll see that it spreads very rapidly throughout the environmental materials. It means that the tritium spreads very, very quickly, no matter where it's found, and that makes it dangerous. I'm going to talk now, switch to the various so-called safety levels of tritium in water. This is expressed in becquerels per liter. A becquerel is 1 nuclear disintegration per second. EU has got a limit of 100 becquerels per liter. United States is 7 times greater. In Ontario, where there's a lot of tritium because of the nuclear power plants, it has recommended a limit of 20 becquerels per liter. In Colorado in the States, it's 18. In California, 15. These are recommendations, by the way. There's quite a lot of politics involved in these limits. For example, the Ontario government refuses to recognize what has been recommended. This limit here is just a recommendation, but it's not enforced by the Ontario government. Now, what I'm going to do now is show you some of the science behind the dangers of tritium. This is a map of, as it happens, the Danube River going through Romania. It doesn't really matter. This is a power station here, Cernavodă. And this is the results of modeling of the release of tritium in a northwesterly direction over a 24-hour period. shows you here what the doses are from ingestion. You can see that the closer you live to the power station, the higher the dose. And the reason why I'm showing you this is a scientific exercise by nuclear scientists, as it happens. Here we go here, the IAEA, back in 2007. And we could look at another study, for example, this one here, showing similarly, this is organically bound tritium doses after release of 1 terabecquerel tritium from the Chernobyl plant, and sorry, not Chernobyl, Chernobyl plant. And so these are estimates of the radioactive isotopes coming out and the resulting doses. Okay, this is so this may not be made available to the public, but this is what scientists actually do, and what they actually figure out what will be the resulting doses. This is a chart showing that as the further away, the closer you get, I should say, to a nuclear generating station in kilometers, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. These are the results of the concentration of tritium in air. As you can see, the closer you get, the higher the air concentrations. These are power stations in Canada. You may say, well, why am I using this? Well, because this is the only data that we've got available, which I can show you in an easily demonstrable form. This is air concentrations, but if you look at concentrations in soil, vegetation, and food moisture, you can see the same pattern. Distance from the nuclear generating stations in kilometers. 100 kilometers, 10, 1. This is a logarithmic scale. You can see that it's more or less a straight line. And in other words, the closer you get to a nuclear facility, the higher the concentrations, and whether it's soil, vegetation, or milk and vegetables. So how do people who are living near nuclear facilities, and this includes Fukushima, get their tritium? Well, from water and food, water and drinks, breathing it in, skin absorption, and from organically bound tritium in food. In other words, people who live near nuclear facilities become tritiated. There's nothing you can do about it. You live there, you get tritium. So that's why it's a danger. And that's why we are very concerned about TEPCO's and Japanese government proposals to dump tritium into the sea. Now, this is difficult for us perhaps to grasp. You can't hear it, see it, smell it, tritium. Oh, sorry, I'll go back one. But it's still there. We have to act as if it's present. And I'm going to give an example of this. For example, most of us do our cooking. We all know that when it comes to raw meat and raw fish, we're very careful, very wary about handling them because of the dangers of food bacteria. Even though we can't see the bacteria, we know that it might be there. So the same with tritium, we need to be wary and act if it's there, as if it were there. Okay? Now, there are serious problems about tritium. Why do I go on and witter on about tritium? The first is that it's its quick distribution. Because of its extreme exchangeability of water molecules, and because that means that water is, of course, the most important element, item in the environment. It means that when you pump out tritium to the environment, it goes all the way through the environment very rapidly. In other words, as soon as you have tritium in the environment, the whole environment becomes contaminated. So it's a quick distribution. That's the first pattern. The second is tritium's radiation biology. It's got a very short range beta particle, roughly speaking about the diameter of a chromosome. So whether it's dangerous or not depends where it is. For example, is it near DNA or RNA? If it is, it's very dangerous. In the past, particularly with the nuclear industry, they described tritium as a weak emitter. But if you know anything about radiation biology, is that the lower the range, the more dangerous it is. In other words, tritium has got a low energy, but it's got is more dangerous than those radionuclides which are strong emitters. Sounds paradoxical, but it's true. I'm a radiation biologist, so I know that to be the case. The third thing is its property of organic bounding. There's very little recognition given in whether by the nuclear industry or even by the IAEA or ICRP to the dangers of organically bound tritium. Essentially, when we get it inside us, it sticks to us and has a long half-life, or a long, not only long radiological half-life, but biological half-life. And this is very poorly recognized in the doses and what they estimate for tritium. So the overall conclusion is that official dose estimates for tritium are significantly underestimated. In other words, whenever we see them saying there's so many microsieverts, that's very unreliable. A good way of looking at it is to say it's the same as arguing that the number of angels on a pinhead. This is what religious arguments were in the Middle Ages. They argued how many angels can you get on a pinhead. It's irrelevant and highly so these dose estimates for tritium are very unreliable. Now, it's not just me who's saying these things. This is 5 publications which are brought out, which show and discuss the controversy over tritium. This is the UK government report here, 2007. This is the IAEA report, again, 2007. My own report, United States report, and a good report by Arjun Makijani. And you can dig these out and read them, and they say exactly what I've been saying. So the main conclusions that near reactors or all nuclear facilities, including Fukushima, there are high concentrations in the air, in food and water. That means high tritium exposures to people living nearby, and that means there's likely to be increased incidences of cancers, particularly leukemias and birth defects. But of course, you can't really pick these up unless you do really expensive, long-lasting epidemiological studies. And these are very few of them, and the nuclear industry tends not to conduct these studies. My recommendations are we should use the precautionary principle. In other words, we should err on the side of caution. Be careful. Secondly, we should do the epidemiology studies that I'm recommending. Thirdly, we should revisit tritium dosimetry and take into account all these characteristics which are dangerous. And most important, we should advise local people all about tritium's dangers. This is a link to my own website, which discusses the hazards of tritium. This report is about 14 pages long. I'm not apologetic about that. The point is that tritium does have a lot of dangers, and we have to study them. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ian Fairley. Let's move on to the Q&A session. We received so many questions. We'll do our best in answering as many questions as we can. Our first question is to Dr. Caitlin Stronell. Several countries threaten to challenge the dumping decision in international court systems. Is there any court action being taken now by South Korea, China, or other Pacific Rim countries? And in regard to that, some countries threaten to protest at the WTO. Is this being done?
Okay. Several countries did threaten to challenge the dumping decision in the international court systems. But at this point, none of them have actually gone ahead with that. And as far as I know, there's no protests at the WTO either.
All right, thank you very much. About the underground pipes, how many underground pipes are being built to dump the wastewater?
Actually, the construction and the design of this whole underground tunnel project hasn't been released yet, so we haven't really seen the plans. So really, the emission method is still under consideration. So we can't really tell how many underground pipes there'll be yet.
All right, thank you very much. Is there going to be independent monitoring of the wastewater's contamination of the ocean, and which agencies are going to monitor the dumping?
Yeah, so TEPCO, in fact, there's not any independent monitoring yet. Like, they haven't actually announced an organization, but they have said that measurement and evaluation by a third-party organization is also available. So it hasn't actually been announced yet, but there seems to be a door open, or at least they're saying it's open. And the Japan Nuclear Regulation Authority will definitely be monitoring the dumping, but as we know with nuclear regulation authorities, sometimes they can't be 100% reliable. I wouldn't call that an independent organization. So this is an area that, we really have to be careful about.
I see, thank you. What kind of radioactive isotopes are going to be looked for in the monitoring by the Japan's Nuclear Regulation Authority?
Right, so in the slide that I showed before, the 62 isotopes, which is the ALPS target nuclides, will be monitored, as well as, of course, tritium and carbon-14.
Right, thank you very much. Are the raw data from all radiation tests of tank water and seawater at and near Fukushima Daiichi plant available for public review?
Basically, yes. They are supposed to be. There is information which is available for public review, but it's hard to tell if TEPCO has released all of the information. There's some up there, but whether it's complete is not 100% sure.
Right. Has an independent scientific team collected radiation data in the past 2 to 5 years? And if so, is that data available for public review?
There's a group called Minna no Data, and it's an independent NGO with scientists and experts, and they've been collecting information and data, and that is available on their website.
Thank you very much. What, if any, marine life samples have been collected to test for radiation exposure beyond testing of commercial fishing catches?
TEPCO and the government fisheries agency test life sample, marine life. They take samples periodically. So those those tests are being conducted.
Thank you. Are you aware that the past year's salmon run numbers were incredibly low and the weight and size of the few returning salmon to Northern California were greatly diminished?
Yeah, I didn't know that about California. In fact, we see that phenomenon in Japan as well. And in Japan, the scientists blame it on global warming. Again, you know, how far we can trust that is a different matter, but there definitely needs to be more research on why this is happening. It's a global kind of, yeah, a phenomenon, so it definitely needs to be looked into.
Right. Another question from the chat. What is the proportionate impact of the threatened 860 trillion becquerels to what has already been emitted? And is there anyone measuring changes in radiation levels in living sea organism where bioconcentration could multiply the proportion found in the seawater itself? Are any such tests being conducted along the shores of North or South America?
I'm not sure about that. I think that regarding the dangers, probably Dr. Fairley might be able to answer that better, but I don't have specific information about North America, I'm afraid.
I see. Dr. Fairley, would you like to chime in?
Yeah. Well, TEPCO and the Japanese government have said that they're going to reduce the concentration down to 1,500 becquerels per liter. They say they're going to do that. I rather privately doubt that. So the answer to the question is, the effect would depend on what the concentrations would be after they have dumped stuff into the Pacific Ocean. Really hard to tell. The questioner wants to know what the effect would be before and after. Very difficult to say, I'm afraid, right now. What we can say in general terms is they shouldn't do it. Absolutely. The effects could be very bad or just bad. That's how I'd answer that question.
Thank you very much. Would you like to add anything, Dr. Strono?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking to Ian's concept of the precautionary principle. We shouldn't be doing anything that it could be dangerous. And yeah, that's really, I think, the guiding principle in this case.
Yes, thank you so much for the importance of using the precautionary principle when we don't have the clear evidence that things are safe. Yeah, thank you so much for pointing that out. Next question, could somebody please sit on Jim Hansen? Sadly, I hear many young people fired up about climate catastrophe who advocate for extended permits for old nukes and building new nukes, citing Dr. Hansen as their basis for that. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I do. And that is that Dr. Hansen, although he is a well-respected guru on climate change, he should stick to climate change because he really doesn't know about the dangers of radiation and radioactivity. So therefore, when it comes to his comments about nuclear power, we should disregard them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just think that there's so many reasons why nuclear is just not the answer to climate change. And apart from the fact that it's just going to take too long to build all of the nuclear reactors that we need to replace carbon, and it's too expensive and it's just not realistic. And anyway, the people in the carbon debate talk about climate justice and not passing on these legacies to future generations, well, I mean, the legacy of nuclear waste is really, it's totally unfair. I mean, that's, if you're talking about justice, there just isn't any in nuclear power. So
Thank you very much for, oh yes.
Can I add something? I often get asked questions about Dr. Hansen, and let me put it to you this way. If ever I met him at a scientific conference, I would say, hello, Dr. Hansen, you should really Google uranium mining. And then I would walk away.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really important that we also talk about environmental injustice surrounding the nuclear fuel chain, including uranium minings, processing, milling, enriching, and also issues on nuclear waste, because we don't have technology or solution to deal with the high-level radioactive waste coming from Fukushima or any other power plants. And we're dealing with tons of high-level, highly radioactive spent fuel coming from regular nuclear reactors. And we are just waiting until one of our children will be smart enough to come up with a solution. So thank you so much, Dr. Fiali and Dr. Strono, for your comments. Let's move on to the next question. This one is about petitions to the UN on this topic of dumping. Any other developments thus far engaging the global community to speak up to the UN? I heard that the youth declaration prepared by RTT's youth committee was shared to UN member states at the United Nations in New York City. Other than that, does anyone have any insights as to this question? All right. So I think the answer is no, except for the youth declaration. Let me see. Let me see whether we have more questions. Are there provisions in any international trade agreements that could be invoked to persuade Japan not to proceed with this planned radiation dump? Well, Japan is saying that their plan to build tunnels will not violate the London Protocol, which is the international treaty to protect marine environment. So they're very sneaky about what they're doing, and they insist that using a tunnel will not be considered dumping under this London Protocol. So we have to continue to raise voices against such claim. And there, as Dr. Stronell mentioned in her presentation, that they're going to continue gaining understandings from local communities on this dumping plan, which means that they're going to spend millions of dollars of taxpayers' money for PR campaign that this plant is safe to the ocean. So we have to collaborate together to delay this process and ultimately stop this dumping plan. Any comments on this regarding what we can do? Any recommendations for action to stop this plan?
I always try to think that, you know, Japan is, the Japanese government is kind of sensitive to gaiatsu, to pressure from foreign countries. But yeah, it needs to be really like a government at a high level. So yeah, kind of working on governments in each country to protest at a high level, I think could be one effective way to try and sway the Japanese government. I remember when we were working on plutonium, one of the things that really helped was getting the US to say to the Japanese government, you've got too much plutonium and it's really a threat, you know, to the region. And so that was effective in some ways. But yeah, sort of trying to convince individual governments of different countries. Sometimes the Japanese government is more sensitive to outside pressure than its own citizens. So that's something for the international community to certainly work on.
Marisha or Kiana, would you like to chime in anything from your perspective? If so, please mute yourself. We can put you in the spotlight if you like. Otherwise, we can move on.
I can add something to
let me put you in the spotlight then. Hold on a second.
So just to add on to what Caitlin said about taking this to the higher up governments, besides having our youth declaration shared to members of the UN during our conference on the crisis of nuclear dumping, there was a question asked to one of the UN ambassadors, Ambassador Sito from Kiribati, whether this issue could be taken up to the UN Security Council because it does threaten our livelihoods. And he did say that that is an option. And also a suggestion would be for governments to create a coalition in order for the international community to hear our concerns.
Thank you so much, Kiana. I think we answered all the questions. Any speakers who would like to add last words or?
Yes, could I
please.
answer a question from Sally Jones? She asks, what's the prospect of finding a way to remove tritium from contaminated water? Well, the answer to that is there aren't any prospects. I've studied this matter, and that although there have been many suggestions, they're all highly impractical. In the world, there's only one plant that I'm aware of that actually does separate tritium from water, but it's extremely expensive, highly inefficient. For example, each pass will remove 0.5% of the tritium involved, so you need to process it hundreds of times to get any effective removal rates. And this is in Canada. So the prospects of removing technological means of removing tritium from water are practically nil. I have, in my website, I have recommended that what the Japanese government and TEPCO should do is that there is lots of land near Fukushima, and they should build more tanks and store it and keep storing it. And my final point would be that how long did they have to store it for? Well, the half-life is 12 years, so take 10 half-lives as being a rough guide. That's 120 years. This gives lots of time to Japanese politicians to consider the wisdom of their energy policy choices.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the guest speakers and all the volunteers who helped us behind the scenes. And thank you very much to everyone who joined us today.
My name is Marisha Jones, and I strongly oppose Japan's decision of releasing 1.25 tons of nuclear wastewater in the Pacific Ocean. This decision alone has the potential to adversely affect the Pacific region as a whole, and we fear for that effect. Our people have long relied on our oceans for various reasons, including transportation, sustenance, tradition, and economic development. We recognize the legacy of nuclear testing in the Pacific and will continue advocating against nuclear matters within our islands that will bring harm to our communities and homeland. The careless disregard by the international community has left many of our islands uninhabitable, leading to the displacement of entire communities. For this reason, we continue the fight to protect our marine environment and its resources against any detrimental impacts that may occur. Hence, we demand to seek other alternatives to this decision to avoid the horrifying impacts it may have on our people today and tomorrow.
Hello everyone, my name is Manluisa Paholo and I come from the Kingdom of Tonga. And today I urge you to protect our ocean. This is not a matter of hypothesis. Try to? Harmless? Radioactive is radioactive. Whether it is the least amount of radioactive atom found, dumping 2.5 billion tons of radioactive wastewater into our ocean will affect many lives. We have already lost loved ones due to the outbreak of COVID-19. We do not want any more lives lost because of our actions, because of decisions based on hypotheses. The Pacific Ocean connects us, each and every one of us. If it affects one, it affects all. Therefore, let us make a change, reverse the trend, protect our ocean. Our very lives depend on it.
To whom it may concern. My name is Kevneth Karai. I want to speak on behalf of those living organisms who cannot speak for themselves or whose voice cannot be heard. I personally, as a Pacific Islander, I am disappointed with the decision of dumping 1.25 million tons of contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean. The ocean creatures deserve to live as much as human beings, and they deserve to be free and live in a clean environment. Our lives depend on marine life as much as they depend on us. Marine life provides us with food and job for many breadwinners out there. Therefore, hashtag stop disturbing marine life, hashtag stop water pollution, hashtag free marine life.
Hello everyone, my name is Claire and I'm a student at the University of the South Pacific studying Foundation Science. So I'm here to express my thoughts and concerns regarding Japan's decision of releasing nuclear wastewater in the Pacific Ocean. So as an activist from Fiji, I oppose of the idea of Japan releasing nuclear wastewater from Fukushima to our oceans. The reason being is that there could be potential damage being done to our environment. So even though it's been said that the wastewater has been treated to remove most of the radioactivity, however, tritium, a radioactive hydrogen isotope, remains. It's been said that it could harm humans with very large doses. So, as someone living in the Pacific, it has come to me that the ocean is very vital to our everyday life. It is where life comes from and connects all of us. So, if harm has been done to our Pacific Ocean, it affects all of us and consequences will occur. It is always important to keep note of it and ensure that our large masses of water still remains intact and stays safe from harm.